Welcome to Permission to Be Human, the podcast. I'm your host, Mel Finlater, mother, coach, and curator of Permission to Be Human, the company and community. If you're a mom, know a mom, or want to be a mom, and you crave getting out in the world to make a difference, then you're in the right place. This is a space for moms like you to connect with yourself, your purpose, and your big, audacious dreams. Because when you feel your best, you can better you, your family, and the wider world. Let's do this. Get ready, folks, because this episode is exactly what I was hoping would happen on this podcast. We have Katelyn Carey with us today, and not only is she super experienced, years of being a nurse in various capacity, teaching the science of well-being in a variety of ways, especially to do with how we manage our stress and how do we react to that and how do we manage being in situations that are going to put us into stress mode, such as nursing or, motherhood. So Katelyn shares a bunch of her story today. I'm going to give a heads up of a trigger warning here. We do speak of breast cancer in this, and we also talk a little bit about miscarriage and medical abortion. So if that is something that is your trigger, please only listen to this when you're in a safe space and able to manage your own emotions that are bound to come up as a human because of it. The nice thing is that's exactly what Katelyn talks to us about, is how do we be this human with all these emotions, and how do we do something with them, right? How do we take care of ourselves within them? How can we be nurturing while still having self-care? And stick around, because at the end of the episode, we'll be talking about Katelyn's self-care first aid kit and give the link for that, and check the notes for that as well. And just stick around, because Katelyn is stinking amazing. Here's how she describes herself, and I would say so much more, but please have a listen. So Katelyn says, I'm helping people in stressful situations, which is sometimes all of us, to shift perspectives in a way that connects us more strongly to ourselves and to each other. I do this by combining complex science from cognitive and trauma fields with humor and stories. I teach the science of compassion, hopefully helping all of us to move to a brighter and more hopeful place. Isn't that just so beautiful? And the examples of what she has done when she has seen something that is not working and gone and fixed it is just beautiful. So stick around. Okay. Hi, Katelyn. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
I am so excited to have you here. In our brief conversations that we've had in the past, I love your story and how it really taps into the humanness of all of us. And we'll hear more about it in a second, but this idea that you see something that needs to be done and you're like, I gotta go and make this right in the world, as well as the very science-backed stuff that you are interested in. So I'm excited to have you here to share your story, as well as share your expertise in this world of science and well-being. So
favorite playground.
Playground being the best word for it, actually. Play is such an important part of all of this very serious self-development stuff. Yeah.
Agreed.
So tell us about, who's Katelyn?
I am a nurse, a clinical educator, a mama of two boys, now 11 and 14, and I am a teacher, and of course a lifelong student, because I think we all should be.
That's awesome. And that is an incredible list of labels. And who's Katelyn?
Well, I've been trained to give the short answer, you see.
I know.
One of my favorite quotes out there is if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter.
Really,
my business coach gave me that one, and I don't remember where it came from, but oh my goodness, so very true.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I am a passion-fueled person who, as you said, saw a bit of darkness and felt the need to create a light there. And when I was younger, I still remember my mom sitting on the stairs with me when I was a teenager and didn't know enough to absorb the conversation, but fortunately knew enough to remember it. And what I remember is while I was still trying to figure out who I was and what my path in the world was, is that she told me if you want to have a happy and satisfying life, she said, pick something to do with yourself that leaves the world a better place behind you. She said it can be a beautiful piece of art or a healthy child. She didn't set the bar so high that I'm like, oh yeah, never. She just said, pick something to do that leaves the world a better place behind you. And certainly she had exemplified that. As I was growing up, my mom was a hospice chaplain, and she would drag us around to different nursing homes where she had patients and make us sing Christmas carols and such. Partly, I think, just to expose us to that part of things, that part of what it means to be a healer and a caregiver and just a loving member of the community. And partly because she couldn't hold a tune in a bucket by herself.
That's really beautiful. I love that description and completely agree with your mom. And, not setting the bar like go change the world, but instead just like leave the world a better place. That's what we're all here to do. And um I love that so much. My big belief that I can now finally put words on is that I think the mothering instinct is what's going to change the world, whether that be a mother or someone with that mothering instinct.
Mm.
And that's exactly what your mom just said there, right? Both in her being as well as her words. So I love that that defines you and what
Our
you've chosen
world could
to
use
do.
more nurturing.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, I love that. So what does life look like right now?
So right now, I work as a hospice case manager. And so part of my job is in the evenings taking care of urgent and emergent needs for hospice patients around New Hampshire. And then during that frees me up for my days, which has actually been fantastic in terms of a work-life balance. It allows me to be a little more focused on my pivot time with my kids, even though they're older now. And so the way that I've supported them has changed. I love kind of having that flexibility of scheduling, having that access. And then I'm looking forward to pulling them into the passion projects that I do. They know all about those. They've been hearing about them for years. I'd say they know quite a bit more about breast cancer and any other given health issue than your average teenager out there. These were the kids who, I once I had a mastectomy and I had my implants removed at a certain point, and the kids were still very young when that happened, and I was not particularly caring anymore about what I looked like. And so these are the kids who would go out in public and be on to the fact that the camisole I was wearing was actually just like an empty pocket. And so they would collapse my boobs in public. So they've been an interesting part of my adventure all along. And they are kind of now an audience, but I hope to later have them as more of an active part to the conference speaking and things that I do now, where I reach out in educational fields, clinical education fields especially, and teach resiliency strategies and also science-based communication tactics for high-stress situations. My whole
Mm,
background was 20 years in acute care nursing specifically. And so I've been
yeah.
having hard conversations with people for a really long time.
Yeah, I bet. I honestly can't even imagine how that goes every single day. And I love that you're out there training. You're combining this hard conversation work with the work of taking care of yourself and enabling other practitioners to take care of themselves while they take care of others. And I think having you on this podcast is such a brilliant opportunity because as mothers, whether we're nurses or not, we are nursing. And I don't mean breastfeeding, though there might be some of that happening, but it's more we are nursing people around, or we are taking care of people all the time. And so often we forget about the part that is take care of ourselves, right?
There are definitely crossover hats. Nurses are part moms, whether you're a mom of kids or not, and
Yeah,
parents are part nurses, whether you're a medical person or not. Yes, to both.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I'm really looking forward to digging into that a little bit more, but I'm curious about your story a little bit more first. In that, you mentioned this time in your life with breast cancer and having the vasectomy and your young children at that time. And if my memory serves correctly, that was maybe the start of something, a little inkling of an idea and something bigger.
That was definitely the start of a small couple pebbles that turned into a landslide.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, my entire family history was very significant for breast cancer. By that I mean that one whole line of my family had basically died from breast cancer by the time that I became an adult. So my great grandmother died at 27, my aunt at 32, my mom at 50. And I made the decision that if I hadn't had kids by the time I was 30, that I was going to have a preventative mastectomy and not continue to run that risk. And I was a brand new nurse at the time. And indeed, I did not have kids. I almost married the wrong guy because I was trying to have kids before I was 30. Fortunately, I
Mm,
caught myself in time and dropped the guy and signed up for surgery.
yeah.
Had a bilateral mastectomy, woke up with a profound sense of relief. I had no idea how scared I was of dying until I finished that surgery.
Wow.
But as soon as I made the physical recovery, I realized how much the mental recovery is a bigger stumbling point.
Yeah.
And as a patient, I had made this decision for myself that I had time to make. I was making this a preventative surgery. So I wasn't being
Mm,
rushed into it by a cancer diagnosis right on my horizon.
yeah.
And I was a nurse. So I knew the medical language. I knew what to ask and who to go to. And I was still so confused and overwhelmed by the information that I received. And I thought, if I can't figure this out, if I'm intimidated by this, if I'm freaked out by these surgical pictures as a nurse, then how is anybody else navigating this successfully? And of course, the answer is most of them aren't.
Yeah.
And I just became so outraged. I'm like, I want to do something about this. I want to fix this. And then there came the time period in which I met the man who later became my husband, and he took these really just gorgeous photos of me. He's like, here, put this on, put this on. He could feel my self-consciousness about my
Yeah.
body. And so instead of trying to convince me that I was beautiful to him, he simply found a way to show me.
Mm,
He showed me myself through his eyes with these pictures. And that was the part where I'm like, oh my gosh, the power of photography is such an amazing tool here. And I would wish I could give anyone who is feeling insecure in their body, one of those photo sessions in which you get to show up as beautiful. Because it's really hard when you're looking at a picture and you're saying, wow, she's pretty. Wow,
mhm.
she's me. To then argue yourself out of the idea of, wow, I guess I'm pretty.
Yeah. Wow.
And that idea turned first into a trifold brochure that I tried to give to the American Cancer Society. That was a lot of just pictures and very personal stories with a little bit of humor about breast cancer surgery and recovery. I tried to give it to the American Cancer Society. They said, no, thanks.
Hmm.
It's just one person's story, and that's not relevant enough.
Okay.
I have passive aggressive issues with the word no. So I got all uppity. I'm like, fine, one person's story not enough. We'll see how many people's stories it takes. Turns out 38. My trifold brochure turned into a 168-page medical resource book featuring 38 breast cancer patients with their shirts off, telling their stories about how they stepped back into a strong sense of self after breast cancer, what kinds of things along the way they found most meaningful. And then each of the pictures were these bare-chested, present in life beyond cancer photos that also just happened to show what different surgery results looked like on real people. And this book, Beauty After Breast Cancer, became this 3-year long, incredibly insane project in which I show up with my kids in the pictures. And then I got to the end of this project and I went, oh, I'm there, we did it. Crap, nobody knows about it. And I realized I was only
Yeah.
halfway done. And I'm so glad I didn't know what I was getting into when I started, because I'm not sure that I could have kept that same kind of motor behind everything. I'm not sure that I could have kept going had I realized at the beginning exactly how many hurdles there would be, but so worth it.
Yeah.
And since then, that book has turned into not just a resource that has been shipped even to Reykjavik, Iceland, and Africa, and Germany, and Ireland, and all over in the US, but it's also turned into, most recently, an example of a trauma-informed resource, and therefore helping medical people understand how do we create resources that people can process when they're stressed.
Yeah. Oh, that like I almost don't have words. I think no, I don't have words. What you have done there in taking something, taking your own journey and all of the emotion and roller coaster that that had, and then using that energy to drive you forward to say, no, I see this is wrong. We need to be sharing this with people in this situation so that they can recover better than they maybe are in our current system, right?
Mhm.
And I just think it's so freaking beautiful. Like, and when you shared that story about your now husband, I like my tears, like my eyes were welling up. I'm like, that is so beautiful. That's like every romantic story that doesn't usually get told, you know?
Right.
Like,
No, it was an amazing, amazing gift. He is an amazing man. And, and I wish that everybody had somebody like him, because I've heard such horror stories and such fears from women. Like, I wonder how many men leave their wives after breast cancer because they're no longer beautiful anymore. And here's this man that, as soon as I started dating him, the first moment of intimacy we had, he took time to specifically pay attention to my chest before he touched me almost anywhere else, just to demonstrate to me how okay this was. He asked questions about, nerve endings. Did I have numb spots? What still felt nice? What didn't? I'm just like, holy cow.
yeah,
It's such a fantastic gift to, give a 29-year-old single woman who just, went from an F cup to to
wow.
a reconstruction that honestly for several years did not feel like it was a part of my body. I refer to my breasts as them, because
Mm,
it's like they're not breasts, they're not even boobs. And it was
yeah.
very funny. One gal told me later, she's like, of course not, that's because they're foobs. I'm like, foobs? She's like, yeah, fake boobs. I'm like, oh my God, you're right, they're totally foobs.
Yeah,
And now my confidence is such that it's just like I get up in the morning, I put on my jewelry, I pick out my outfit, I pick out my boobs, and we're good for the day. Some outfits look better with smaller boobs, some look with bigger boobs. You just kind of match them up. It's fun.
brilliant. That's awesome. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. And it's such a good example also of how it's not like these things aren't easy. So I would describe, maybe you didn't even know the words you had for it at the time, but that was a big audacious dream. You're like, I gotta fix this. I gotta make this better. Right.
Yeah.
And as you said, like if you knew the ins and out of what it would take at the beginning, you might not have had the energy and oomph to be able to like push through, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not easy doing this stuff. It's really not. There's
No,
easy
there were
parts, but
a lot of tears, a lot of stress points. There was a lot of
yeah,
great lessons learned, like, how much it matters to us to have success stories of other people going through the same struggles we're going through, how
yeah,
much that helps us hold on to the lifeline while we're being pulled into the rescue boat.
yeah.
But then there were other lessons, like chocolate chip cookie dough goes really well with whiskey.
Interesting. I would
Yes.
not have known that, to be
I
fair,
didn't
that
know
I
that
do like
until I
a
did
good
this
whiskey.
project. Then I found out. Cheers, chocolate chip cookie dough, and whiskey. Trifecta.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, so you had this journey through creating this beautiful resource, which I would love to see, by the way, at some point in time. And that led you on to, I'm not sure, I can't remember the exact words you said, but it led you on to where you are now, where you can use this as an example of the type of resource that can be used. And
Mhm.
in this place of trauma that is our medical system, right? Where
Yeah.
usually when you're going to the hospital, there's some sort of trauma involved, right? Or in another part of our medical system. I say our, I'm in Canada, you're in the US. So they're slightly different, but it's still all medicine, right?
Yeah.
And something's wrong. So you're going in to try to fix it. And
And trauma brain is trauma brain no matter where you
trauma
live.
brain is trauma brain. Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about that and where you're at with that now and where your interests lie with it and wherever you want to take that.
Yeah, okay. So part of it was just learning to understand the science of stress. That for human beings, the most stressful situation that we can possibly be in is one that is high emotional context and low control. And when we are in a traumatic situation, really what that means is that we're in a situation that has overwhelmed our coping mechanisms. That is trauma in a nutshell, just something that overwhelms our coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
And when we flip into that higher stress brain, then, and it doesn't take much, it can be 3 days of your kid crying. And
Yeah.
suddenly, you know what? You're in survival brain, you're in trauma mode, you have overwhelmed your coping mechanisms. And when we're in survival brain, we process differently. We're chemically different and we're mentally different. We pay much more attention to the things that are sensory than we do any kind of in-depth thought process, which is not a surprise when I say it like that, but it matters in the outcomes. So for somebody, for example, who just walked into the office, and I'll give one example that's a mama example. She said that she had been pregnant. I'll just call her Anne. Anne said that she was on her first pregnancy and she went in for the first ultrasound where you're supposed to be, get your kind of mini gender reveal maybe and hear about the health of your baby. And they said, why don't you go talk to the doctor in his office after you get dressed? And they didn't tell her anything. And she knew there was something
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
And she walked into the doctor's office where she was told basically that her fetus, her hopefully soon to be infant, had a medical condition that was incompatible with life, and that they were going to need to plan, medical abortion for her. And she said all she remembers was the first sentence that the doctor gave her, and then she remembers the smell of the hallway and the art that was on the doctor's desk.
Yeah.
It's like, of course you do. Of course that's all it remembers, because as soon as you switch to survival brain, your body's looking for the bear.
Yeah.
Where's the bear who's attacking you in the room? Because this is a fight or flight type of situation.
Yeah.
And until that emotional need for safety is addressed, we don't process anything more. Now, interesting things that come with that is when you're in that brain mindset, one of the best things that you can do for yourself is take the time for the emotional reassurance to happen before you ask more complex things. If we were really doing a good job in the medical field, that doctor would have said, here's what's happening. We need to schedule an appointment. I'm going to give you this one piece of paper with a little bit more information, and I'm going to call you in 24 hours for us to talk about what needs to happen next. I mean, the conversation should just end after the first sentence.
Yeah.
Here's a little bit more information if you're ready to read it. And if you're not, look at it when you're ready. We're going to call you back in 24 hours and we'll go from there. And then maybe you come back and we give you a little bit more information about what this means. You have a chance to answer questions and you bring your support person with you.
Yeah.
That would be a functional trauma-based system.
Yeah.
But for us as human beings, when we're flipped over into what's sometimes referred to as amygdala hijack, which is really
Yeah.
anytime the high emotion brain takes over, or the I'm so overwhelmed, I'm losing it and can no longer think critically. A lot of it is about just coming back into our bodies again. When you hear about how beneficial, for example, mindfulness is, or meditation. Now, you're talking to somebody who, in the span of one small meditation, can redesign a hospital triage area and finish her grocery list. Okay, meditation is not my cup of tea, really. But meditation doesn't have to be about the really intensive sit down, visualize your happy place, and spend 20 minutes in a state of being. Meditation can be, oh, I'll give you mine.
Okay.
My cheater meditation is called Tea in 3. It is this: make a cup of tea, sit down with the cup of tea, sit back down. You're not done with the cup of tea. Feel the heat of the cup, sniff the aroma, feel the sit back down. You're not done with the tea.
Yeah.
You're getting the idea here, aren't you? And during the 6 or 7 times that I make myself sit back down because I tried to get up and go do something, I give myself permission to come up with a list of 3 things. 2 of those things are things that I can check off on my to-do list in totality. So it can't be like a part of something. It can't be, if I'm painting the kitchen that day, it can't be paint the kitchen. I'm not going to get from start to finish. It has to be go buy the paint.
Mm.
It has to be just one step of it. So 2 things that I can check off in totality and 1 self-care item that I'm going to accomplish that day. And then I sit the heck down and I finish the dang cup of tea.
Yeah.
Because I cannot tell you how many cups of tea have been left around my house that I just never even remembered that I didn't finish. And so just being able to sit still and do that and enjoy that and make myself be present in the moment with it was huge. And giving myself something that I felt like I could make progress on in totality, and 1 little self-care thing that I was going to do that day was a complete reset. So that kind of mini mindset, mini meditation type of exercise or mindfulness exercise in and of itself is hugely helpful because it just reminds us how to check in with our bodies and go, oh my gosh, I'm in distress right now. What can I do about that? Because there's nothing you're going to do about it if you don't even have the wherewithal to realize when you're becoming distressed.
Yeah. I love that example because it's a really practical way to that is mindfulness. That is a form of meditation, 100%, because so often we think of it as you need to sit down and not think, which is literally impossible, right? Like your brain will think because that's what it's designed to do. And the way you're describing that is like you physically want to and do sometimes stand up because you're on to the next thing. And mindfulness is about bringing yourself back into the moment over and over and over and over again because you want to stand up or you want to think about the grocery list or you want to whatever, right?
Yep.
So that is such a beautiful example of a habit that one could create in the morning to set yourself up for the day. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that it would be one of the examples of what I call real life resiliency hacks.
Yeah.
It's the stuff not that you're supposed to do, but you still haven't gotten around to it in the years that you've known you're supposed to do it, but the stuff that you can actually make yourself do.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And that's the important part about this because so often we can read, the bookshelf full of books behind me that teaches us some very big broad ideas about things and then feel like so overwhelmed by what you could do without knowing a specific example that
Yeah.
you just don't do anything, to be
Well,
honest.
what you could do and what you
Right?
should do, because by the time you
Yeah.
finish the list of what you should do, you're so racked by guilt, and the guilt is taking up so much bandwidth. There's no energy left for anything else.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. Like mom guilt is real in so many
Oh gosh,
ways,
yes.
right? Whether about being mom or not, the guilt is certainly there. And I really like how you described how, our brains can't think when we are in that stress mode. They cannot. Like they shut down, they're looking for the bear, the tiger, whatever it is, the threat that's in the room. And I think that's a really important one to point out, not only for us as moms. So if we're triggered by something in life, whether that be our child or getting rejected for the threefold flyer you just put out there, or whatever it might be, then we're not going to be able to think right away. And
Mhm.
I think that applies to our everyday lives too. So if our kid triggers me, so my kid completely ignoring me and not even responding or looking at me is my trigger, right?
Mhm.
Which happens every day, a million times a day.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
That's the thing.
so where I'm going with this is that as parents and as humans, because we are human, hence the name of the podcast, Permission to Be Human, it's okay to
Mm,
just not be able to think in that moment. And instead of trying to fix it or have someone fix it for us, just finding some way of retreating, essentially, until we can think again. Um, and ideally have doing some things, which I'm sure you have lots of great ideas of what exactly we could do in that moment. And then before we jump right into what that could be, the other thing that's coming to my mind is the fact it's a nice little reminder that our kids also can't think when they're in stress mode. Right?
mhm.
And it's so common, all of us do it, to, they're freaking out about something and we're trying to teach them a lesson, but they have no idea what we're saying.
Right. Right.
None of it's going in, like
Mhm.
absolutely none. Like they were rude, for example, because they were so overwhelmed by something.
Yep,
And
and
we're
we
like,
wanna
oh, you
correct
can't
them
talk to
in
me
that
like that.
moment.
Exactly. And then we need to sit down and we just talk about how we talk to each other. And it's like, no, none of
No,
it
not
means
right now.
anything. All it does is put shame, but it doesn't actually help anybody learn. So the
It's like
question
we
is,
mixed up our dog parent cat parent brain with our kid parent brain, where they're like, if you don't do it right away, then the dog won't associate it with the action you're correcting. I'm like, okay, that might be true for the dog. It's less true for my toddler or my teenager.
totally. And honestly, I'd argue it isn't really even true for our dogs.
It might
I
not
have a
be.
very highly anxious dog sitting well, she's laying very comfortably on the floor right now, but like if I go into stress mode with her, she doesn't listen either. But
Mhm.
so so what would you say in those moments, either one of those situations or both, what can we do when we're in either us or our child or someone we're talking to is in stress mode? What can we do
Mm.
instead?
Well, I love that you brought up in that question, even though you didn't wrap it into the question itself, you brought up, oh, and this is my trigger.
Hmm.
So that's actually one of the first things that we do. Uh, when I put together emotional first aid kits for nurses, the very first piece of that is identifying what are your triggers? What are your common push buttons? And what happens to your body or your behavior when you're starting to get close to your wall? Think of this like think of this like if you've ever done CPR class.
Hmm.
If you've ever gone through CPR training, they teach you over and over again, ABC, ABC, airway, breathing, circulation. This is the first things you do. And they tell you over and over and over and over again, why the repetition? And then you have to recertify every 2 years. Why that much repetition on such a simple concept? Well, because when we're in amygdala hijack, we need simple steps. We can't process complex.
Yeah.
We need something that our brain can just totally autopilot to.
Yeah.
And so just like we learn, hey, if your left arm is starting to go numb, if pain is radiating into your jaw, if your heart is starting to, your chest is starting to hurt and you're short of breath, these are distress symptoms. These are warning flags that something is about to go wrong. And then if something does go wrong, here's what you do, A, B, C. It's the same thing for our emotional status, knowing what our triggers are and what our danger signs are. Do the shoulders start to get tight? Do you talk more? Do you talk less? Does your voice start to get a little bit, do you start to enunciate a little more clearly? Or, do you get really quiet? How do you know when your body's tipping over? And in the same way, in terms of what do you notice in your body when you're getting there, you do the same thing in reverse. So, from a science hack, one of the best things that can take us from amygdala processing back into prefrontal cortex processing goes back to that body awareness thing. And it's simply a matter of using words inside your own head to go, I can feel my shoulders are tight. I can feel how tense I am. I'm noticing that I'm getting incredibly frustrated right now. And really, what you're doing by putting words to what you're experiencing is you are poking holes in this barrier that goes down between amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Language is a process of the prefrontal cortex, but the emotional center And the body response, the sensory stuff, that's amygdala hijack, that's amygdala processing. So you tie the two together by using language to describe the sensations. And in that way, you kind of creep your own way forward back into that I'm able to think a little bit more critically space.
Mm.
And then just knowing, what kind of things can you do in that moment? You heard me talk about the T and 3, feeling the sensation of T. If I'm in the ER and I'm losing it, if I can take a break and go into the break room and just concentrate on pouring, a very hot or a very cold cup of something where I can concentrate on the sensations of that, take a couple sips of whatever that is. Sometimes that's enough as I'm describing what I'm going through. I can feel the cold, I can feel it slide down my throat. I can take a couple sips of this. Okay, here's what the cup feels like in my hand. That little language use can help you climb back to your thinking brain a lot faster. So that's
Yeah.
one really fun little tiny hack right there of use the language. And the funny part is, as parents, we know this because we do it with our kids. When we see them start to lose it, what do we say? Hey, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
You know, and we start using words to label their emotion. You know, you're screaming or you're you're looking really tense right now. Take a deep breath.
Yeah.
So when we have those instincts to kind of label what our kids are going through, oh, I see you're really frustrated right now. We're actually giving them those words to poke holes in their own barrier and kind of step back into their prefrontal cortex. Doing that intentionally is a fantastic way for us to help our kids when they're in distress and a fantastic way to help ourselves out.
Yeah.
But the second part is going to be being okay to step away
Yeah.
and come
And
back
let
to the
the feelings
conversation when we're
feel.
not.
Yeah.
Well, and that piece right there is something that I also enjoy playgrounds in, which is empathy versus compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us. Tell us the empathy versus compassion. Now, firstly, to say that, Katelyn, you have a TEDx talk, which, what's the title of it?
The problem with empathy.
Okay. The problem with empathy, TEDx talk, go and listen to it because it will only be able to tap into it here, but it was absolutely fascinating. And I have to say, watching it, I can't remember if I told you this or not after I watched it. So I've always considered empathy my superpower,
Mm,
right? I
yeah.
feel big. I internalize a lot of it, but I feel big. And I've described it that way to my kids. So the title of your talk, I was like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, I was like,
I had to be
back this
careful. I
up.
knew I was going to
Like,
make people a little bit edgy with that.
totally. And then you wait and I wait and wait. I'm listening. And then you got to the point of empathy versus compassion. And that's when it really hit and has me exploring and being really curious about this difference. And while I don't necessarily use the same words in my past, I am 100% on board with what you're about to share with us. So tell me about empathy versus compassion.
I have a really big soapbox that I carry around on this one because I think that we've been sold empathy as a universal fix-all. And empathy totally does have an appropriate place. But there's also times when empathy is more detrimental than it is helpful. So empathy is great if we just had someone, let's say I'm working at a counter at a cafe and somebody comes up and they're just incredibly rude with their order. And I think, maybe they just lost their job. Maybe they just got bad news from a family member. And I excuse the behavior and I allow that moment of potential empathy, of picturing what they might be going through to raise a act or feeling of kindness in myself. Empathy is fantastic for that. The reason empathy is fantastic for that is because it doesn't matter if I'm right. I imagined myself in that other person's shoes, thought what might make them behave that way, and I used it to prompt kindness. Doesn't matter if they got fired or if they got bad news or if they're really just a jerk.
Yeah.
Either way, I didn't allow myself to be sucked into the situation, and I acted in the way that I want to act. But then there's situations that are either really high emotion or really high complexity. And I'll use this one as a parent example too. Think about the brand new parent who every single time the baby cries is just like, oh God, oh, is she in pain? Is she hungry? What's going on? And they get anxious and they get worked up, and their anxiety often will kind of cycle that baby's anxiety. As a pediatric neonatal intensive care nurse for many months, I was around so many nurses that were just like, oh, yep, she's crying. And we would be so casual almost with these kids that we were frequently alarming to parents.
Yeah.
But by not jumping into their emotional distress, we were far more effective in our ability to resolve their emotional distress. Because, as you mentioned, we get into that hijack mode and we're not able to think critically of solutions. And we're, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? Why isn't she stopping? What's going on? Why isn't this working? And the way I describe it most often metaphorically is it's seeing somebody in distress in the water and either going, oh my gosh, what would I want if I was them? Oh my God, they're drowning. If I were drowning, I want you to come and get me. Okay, technically I want Jason Momoa to come and get me, but close enough. So I jump in the water and I go get the person, or I try to. Any lifeguard out there will tell you that is risky.
Yeah.
Whereas if I take a step back and go, okay, it's not my distress, it's their distress. I still care. I still want to help. It's not my distress, it's their distress. What is the situation? What skills or knowledge do I possess that can help? Now, maybe instead of jumping in the water, I reach for the life preserver and I toss that to the person and I call for help. And just in case those things don't work, I'm still able to think critically about the next step. So in actuality, my being a little bit of a step back and not emotionally jumping into the other person's shoes allows me to protect that space for them, allows me to be the one that makes their distress safe because I'm working on a solution. So maybe they don't have to be. And that difference, I think, is especially important for people who are, as you described yourself, very empathy based, very feeling based, and we automatically jump in emotionally to other people's distress, and we want so badly to help, but sometimes we want so badly to help that we're actually less able to be of support.
Yeah.
And I'll throw one other really quick example in, which is I was on my way to teach about this to a group of oncology nurses, and the woman on the plane next to me who I was describing it to, she's like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what you're talking about. She said, we had to put my dog to sleep. And we went in, and the vet had been working with us for years, and the vet was tearing up. And it was the worst possible thing. She
Yeah.
said, because I didn't want to dive into my emotions right then. And the fact that the vet was tearing up was making it harder for me not to crash and burn right there in a place I didn't feel safe to be in with my emotions. And she said, what's more is it wasn't what I needed from them.
Mm.
Their distress and their resonance with me in that emotional moment wasn't what I needed. She said, what I needed was that vet to say, you're making the right decision. You really have done everything that is reasonable to do, and we're out of
Yeah.
options.
Yeah.
And so she needed them calm. She needed that professional voice there and
Yeah.
not that empathetic resonance. And there are situations where that's true for us too. And part of it is letting go of the guilt that it's okay not to be in the emotion with the other person.
Yeah.
And part of it is understanding that we can even be more effective sometimes if we're not in the emotion with the person.
Yeah. Because we can think, right? And that's such a good example, and also a fascinating one. Just a little side personal note on the vet front. I
Mm-hmm.
love animals, and my dad as a child was like, Mel, you just like, you can talk to animals, you can like, you should be a vet. And I was like, I knew right away. I was like, nope, I can't be
Mm.
a vet because I would be that vet. I
Yeah.
would not be able, like, I was welling up with when you were telling that story, right? Because I can't separate myself from the emotions of pets.
Yeah.
I'm much better with people than I am with pets. And I think it's knowing those situations when you won't necessarily be able to, or that you need a lot more
Mm-hmm.
practice to go into, as you say, compassion and step away from diving in to empathy.
And
Um,
sometimes it is about practicing. It's about practicing and giving yourself permission,
yeah,
and then also recognizing that those moments when you weren't able to effectively not jump in, at least part way, recognizing at the end of that day, you know what? That took a really big scoop out of my bucket.
yeah,
What am I going to do of that T&3 self-care third item? What am I going to do to put that scoop back in?
yeah,
Because too often we just take scoops out. We know we took scoops out of our bucket.
yeah,
We know we're running dry.
yeah,
And yet we just carry on. It's like, oh, it'll be fine. It's like, how do you figure? If you take water out of a bucket and you've only got one bucket, how do you figure it's going to be okay if you never do anything to put water back in again?
yeah,
I encourage people, it's like, have a list.
yeah,
Have a list of things that you can do in 5 minutes or less that put a little bit of water back in. You know, I used to take a shortcut around the hospital in which I went out the east door and back in the west by just walking around the hospital to get back in the other side because I just needed to go outside and be part of a reality that wasn't part of the drama. So
yeah,
that was a 5 minutes or less thing. And then at the end of the day, when you have a safe place, what does it mean to put a scoop back in your bucket? You know, maybe it does mean whiskey and chocolate chip cookie dough, or maybe it does mean, as you and I discussed, a bath. And that one's a big one for me too. Bath and a book.
yeah.
That's a put a scoop back in thing for me. But recognizing that we have to.
Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you. So we need to start pulling things to a close. And I always finish on this question of any top tips that you've given us plenty already, but any top
Mhm.
tips for the moms who are listening. And where my mind leads is actually maybe some examples of how do we fill that bucket back up when we are still learning how to do this, which is a lifelong lesson, I might add, right? How do
Oh,
we
absolutely. It's a practice thing.
right? Like I'm guessing you're sitting here telling us about all of this, and you're, a fair few steps ahead of myself and some listening, but you're not there, right? Like you still are practicing
Nobody's
this
100% there.
every day because we're
Nobody's
human.
100%.
That is
Yes.
human.
We're going to goop it up.
So yeah, tell us maybe something else that we could do that would be that 5 minute or less, fill your bucket
Mhm.
resiliency.
Well, I will definitely give you a link to the tool, which is just a place to fill out, what are my triggers? How do I know I'm coming close to hitting my wall? And then what are my 5 minutes or less? And then what are my when I'm in a safe place? Because certainly it is individual for all of us, but there are some ones that are big hitters that are worth mentioning. The mindfulness is absolutely one. My mindfulness
Yeah,
really is the TN3 because I stink at meditation. Uh, but
yeah,
it could be meditation. That is actually a powerhouse one. Another one is outside, going outside and in any capacity, whether it's a walk around the neighborhood or whether here's a cool one. They did this whole complex study of emotions, and they found out that from a immune system standpoint, uh, the emotion that is most healthy for us in bolstering our immunity and kind of returning us to a natural state of health, the emotion that is most heavily associated with that is awe. And for most people, 75% of the folks in the study, they found awe in nature. So one of my cheats for people is if you have like just you're at your limit and you're like, oh my God, I can't do, no, none of it is doable right now. Take your cell phone camera, go outside and find 3 things to take a picture of that somehow capture you in their
yeah,
beauty, in their complexity, in something. And just come back inside. Start forming yourself a little photo album in your phone for these things. Biophilia is this entire field that talks about our resonance with nature and how much impact it has. It's really cool. I won't dive into it. I've complicated the the conversation enough with science, but that's a great one. Another powerhouse item too that I'll mention is monitoring our own internal scripting, making sure that we're being kind to ourselves in the way we talk to each other, or the way we talk to ourselves in the same way that we would be kind to the way that we talk to each other. Be your own friend. And if you need to practice or write yourself a new script, And another great big one is that we become a lot more positive naturally when we focus on gratitude. So just thinking through a couple things in that day, it's like, you know what, that really stunk, but I'm grateful, that I at least have XYZ. Finding those little silver lining moments helps our brains to just turn more positive in general.
Yeah.
But
Those are such good examples. I could go on, and I think we should have you back to geek out on the nature thing, because that's like one of my favorite topics.
oh yeah.
And I can think of a dozen times that I have been in almost panic attack mode and
Mhm.
gone outside and just stared at a tree to
Yeah.
like notice what was on it and what is it teaching me right now, and what is it, just what is it? Like, how is a tree in existence? And you just, it's that distraction as
Yeah.
so many other things. So
And you're
we could
naturally
totally
using
geek out.
that
Yeah,
language description to kind of walk
exactly.
yourself back into prefrontal cortex by using nature as the trigger. So you combined the powerhouses. That's amazing.
Exactly. And that's what noticing nature is. So, like I said, we could talk for an hour about that, and perhaps we should. But I love those examples. I love the tools you've given us there. And yes, please do give us the link, and I will share it out with everybody, both on our social media posts as well as in the description to this particular episode. And uh just thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and just being human and real about it all. And that,
Mm.
that's so important. And it's not every day that you get someone who's down to earth whilst talking about some pretty, big topics in the well-being space. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, such a pleasure. No, I'm so glad that you invited me in. Thank you for that. And hoping that the tips and bits shared along the way are gonna be helpful for folks. Because
Excellent.
yeah,
And where can they find you? What's the best way to find you and the work you're doing? Perhaps, there might be some listeners here that are in that nursing field or in that professional space that may be interested in your talks or your work that you're doing in that space, as well as obviously the incredible detail that you've given us just as mothers as well.
hmm. You can get to all my stuff through KatelynCarey.com, which is KatelynCarey.com. And that'll take you both to the beautyafterbreastcancer.com page where the book is, and you can see pictures and hear some of the excerpts from the book. That will take you to some of the other articles that have been posted about these types of topics that I've written. It'll take you to a link to the TED Talk, and I will definitely post some of the other resources there as well. LinkedIn is also just under Katelyn Carey, and you can also get to that through my website too.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks.
See, wasn't that worth sticking around for? Kaylin is so freaking amazing, and I just love how specific her tips are. We could really go out and do all those things right now. So, if you'd like to, feel free to check out her self-care first aid toolkit. And it is at caitlincarey.com/free-tools. I know I will be looking through it and putting it into practice in my own life, because I can always deal with a little more self-care. And honestly, I think you probably can too. So, thanks for sticking around. That is it, folks. This has been Mel Finlater on Permission to Be Human, the podcast. And I am so glad that you have joined us here today, and hope that you have taken away some tidbits that will help you go away, connect with your big, audacious dream, and make that massive impact in the world that you are dying to make. If you liked today's episode, please, please, please like it, share it. Think of one person that you think would also like it, and send it on over to them. Let's get this out there, and more moms feeling like themselves, inspired, dreaming big, and out there being them. Please do head on over to find me on Facebook with Permission to Be Human, or Instagram, or you can even pop me an email and say hello at permissiontobehumanalways@gmail.com. Say hello and let me know that you listened. What did you like about it? I would love to hear. If you didn't like it, I don't really want to know. Just kidding. You can share that if you want. I would love to know, however, who you are. Let's connect. Let's find out what you want more of. I want to hear from you, and I want to make it what would be useful to you. As always, remember that you have permission to dream big, permission to feel big, and permission to be you. You have complete and full permission to be human. For real, you do.